like sizeism is a thing. We can make assumptions. Could you just share what that is and like why does it matter to people at work?
Yeah. For Sizeism, a big part of it is just understanding that there's a lot of systemic barriers for folks that are not within the means of what's considered healthy, which in it, the word in itself has changed for years. If we think about how health was seen back in the 20th century, not the 20th century, but in the 1920s, being what would be considered a little bit on like the fluffier side, where there was a little bit more fat in someone's body was considered healthy. Whereas now having any sort of a large percentage of, I'm getting stuck, but just even having like a bigger body was, or is seen currently as being unhealthy or having more health issues. So when we think of sizeism, we think about it in how it comes up in environments of, or in spaces of privilege, right? So thinking about spaces where you go to the movie theater, someone that is of a slimmer body doesn't necessarily have to think about, am I going to be able to fit in the seat? Whereas someone that's a little bit larger bodied would have these thoughts of, oh, okay, so if I can't sit here, how can I adjust my body to fit in this space? That's an example of where it shows up. Another way can be thinking about having access to certain things like life insurance, where someone that's in a bigger body, that there's a lot of concerns of health issues. So then that might be that the policy would be more expensive for someone that is of a larger body than a smaller body. So then when we think of sizeism, is really considering in what spaces or in what environments does someone in a bigger body have to consider multiple aspects that someone that has a smaller body doesn't really have that mental space to really process or really even consider, oh, am I going to be able to go on a plane ride and consider having to purchase 2 tickets? So in those spaces, it's really considering sizeism is just the overarching ism of not taking all people's bodies into account. So really unpacking that, addressing that, and really just focusing on having those conversations of why is that an issue? Why is that a concern?
Yes. Yeah. And as you were talking, I'm thinking about so many different situations that I've seen in various professional settings where comments are made. They're not part of the inclusive umbrella. Oftentimes, when I say that, it can mean a lot of things. It can mean something as simple as when we're doing trainings, there's not like a real diversity of different body types in the images that we're using. That's just one very, very small, tangible thing. But I think what I hear, it's more what I hear,
Yeah.
probably than anything else, is how the words that we use to refer to people, jokes we make, compliments that we give people that reinforce the preference for smaller body sizes. And these types of comments exist all the time. And just to give like super tangible example for people, I know that if there are comments about praising people for losing weight, saying that they look good, saying that they look healthier, telling them to keep doing whatever it is. And that's just to one person. We don't know what that person's journey is or what that means. We don't know what it means to other people around. But in that moment, we really are sending the message to people that if you are getting smaller, that means a lot of great things. And therefore, that also means some other stuff for people that might not be in that particular category. That's just one example. But there are so many things that are said and done. And I'm thinking about the impact of people in these settings. The impact of the message is that there's something wrong with your body. You don't look good. You're not a healthy person. You're not whatever it is. There are messages that we are sending to people without really realizing it. So the language that we use to refer to people, our frame of reference, the jokes we make have an impact that we're not really paying attention to. So I wanted to lift that up. And I imagine that you've seen, experienced, whatever, like some versions of this. So anything you want to add to that?
Yeah. And I also want to take into account that it's not just about like folks that are in larger body, but also taking into account folks that have much, much smaller bodies that folks don't necessarily even consider as healthy. So a lot of times even praising folks that are of much slimmer bodies and not taking into account that maybe the person struggling with trying to gain weight and being of what would be more of a healthier appearance or healthier physiological or where their body would need to be at, because there's biological factors, there's sometimes trauma that comes into effect. So I do also want to take into account that the opposite spectrum is also there. And there's issues where sometimes we praise folks that are much smaller bodies and letting them know, hey, what are you doing to continue being so small, and not taking into account that just even asking a simple question like that can be very impactful. And it's not just necessarily in just being in a bigger body. It comes in spaces that is pretty much overarching, that you are not in the, I don't want to call it in the middle because there is no necessarily middle, but it's just what we see as healthier bodies continues to shift. So in those spaces, I want to also take into account that it's not just about the bigger bodies. It's also the other end of it. And I feel like a lot of it is through that training that I learned a lot of that language, a lot of that understanding, that being very mindful of the words that we use. And sometimes understanding that certain words don't work for everyone. There's going to be folks that if you say heavy might just bring up things for them. Whereas for other people, even just saying the word bigger body or larger body, it's just that language, it continues to shift because it's trying to find that good medium always becomes an issue. So in those ways, I see myself really trying to learn a lot of like, okay, this works for folks, this doesn't work for folks. And how can I continue to like be very intentional about the words that I use, whether that means that I have to take a moment to like really process, okay, what am I trying to bring? What am I trying to say, without just going straight to, and when with something that you mentioned, going straight into complimenting their struggles of losing weight, or even understanding that it's not always about weight and stepping away from that, and really taking into account that because there's such a large issue with, or such a large topic on really focusing on people's weights and people's bodies, that this is why it's odd where there's a lot of normalizing talking about losing weight, but there's not a lot of normalizing about how do we step away from that and really focus on why is that an issue?
Yeah. Thank you for widening our view on even this topic. It's just a really great example of the inclusivity, being inclusive about the things we're being inclusive about.